but I'm so happy to see so many faces here today to be here for the briefing that we have scheduled from AECOM in partnership with the Capital Region Council of Governments. I want to give a really big shout out to Lyle Ray, who understood the importance of trying to understand the economic impact connecting Hartford and Springfield and the inland route. And so thank you, Lyle, for all the work that you've done and the support that you've given to this. We will turn this over to AECOM to do the briefing. We will have an opportunity for questions afterwards. And yes, we will be able to provide you the slides at the end. So we'll get that to you as well. All right, without further ado, Steve, would you like to say anything, or are we moving right to Chris?
Oh, I have some things I'd like to say. Good morning. My name's Stephen Gazzello. I work with AECOM. We're a global transportation planning engineering management firm. So we've been engaged by the Capital Region Council of Governments to conduct this study, and I have to recognize the insights and guidance we've gotten from Lyle as a key element, along with Tim Malone, who has really did a great job managing us. We worked through with CROG constantly in a process that really did provide great guidance. And also, Kim, thanks to you for hosting this, and to Patrick for setting this up. So a few quick notes. So when we were putting this together and putting our team together, I wanted to make sure we brought in an objective, unbiased approach. And having worked with Chris Brewer and his team out of our Chicago office, I knew they were the best fit for this work. And so what you're hearing today, or will hear today, is the result of their efforts, conservative, well-researched investigation into potential economic benefits resulting from rail investment in the Metro Hartford-Springfield region. I think the results are significant, and they really tell a story that hasn't been told in some or many even of the prior studies. So the key players that put this together is Chris Brewer, our lead economist from Chicago, as principal author, along with Al Rain, who's our national TOD lead, Jessica Jones, who worked closely with Chris and who's on here today, we're running the slides and answering questions. We had participants from our planning team, Chris Nielsen, Daniel Geider, and Stacy Zung, for all of their work in data collection, graphics, GIS mapping. A lot went into this. Finally, I'd like to thank Dan Hodge of Hodge Economic Consulting, because he provided an independent review. He's out of Northampton, and really gave us excellent input on our team's technical work. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chris for our presentation.
Stephen, thank you very much. On behalf of my colleagues, it's really been an exciting opportunity to sort of dive into this effort. Obviously, as an economist, I always appreciate sort of wading into and developing a data-driven approach to get at important policy questions. This effort, I think, has been, in some respects, very straightforward. As we go to the next slide, the scope was simple enough to try and document a set of economic benefits that we can attribute to and associate with what we would essentially describe as the reformation of a 21st century inland route. And I know for myself, it's just trying to come up with a set of economic arguments that make sense, that are logical, that speak to, net new benefits. In other words, new development that would happen because of the project. And this is always in any economic impact study, to be able to get to a defendable conversation about net new is really the gold standard in any sort of effort. So our core study area really focuses down on 3 counties, 2 in Massachusetts, 1 in Connecticut. And obviously the segment in yellow is essentially the reformation of a route that has existed for a very long time. I think, going back to the beginning of the study, it was very clear that Hartford and Springfield historically enjoyed unmatched rail access, probably one of the few places in the country where there was consequential access that was gradually taken away over time. So as we go to the next slide, I'm always fond of putting things in geographic context. And for us, that starts with what we call the Northeast mega region. Probably the single largest block of people in the United States, 50 million. It's a growing region. And the thing we start to appreciate here is this reality of our Metro Hartford-Springfield area in context with the mega region, but also in context with the Northeast corridor. And we always get to a simple notion of a Metro Hartford-Springfield region that is fundamentally, not growing at the same rate as these larger areas. So as an economist, we always get to that simple notion of, capturing a decreasing share of a growing market. And that starts to drive our conversation about, well, why are we not participating in this market? What are we missing out? What's going on? What's preventing us from capturing and accessing these bigger markets gets to be a core question. So as we go to the next slide, I think, our starting point for Metro Hartford and Springfield is that, if you were to take the state boundary out of play, you end up with an economically consequential region. And I think for us, that means it's a top 40 market, 1.6 million residents, a consequential economic place, even in context with the Northeast corridor. But the two trends that we notice that are important are just a set of industries related to professional services and finance that are underperforming, particularly since 2010, but structurally underperforming. And this lack of performance for us was a key theme that we began to pay attention to in the study. So as we go to the next slide, fundamentally for us, what we started to sort of zero in on was this notion of lower rate of job growth going back to the early 1990s. And again, I was at UNH getting my master's degree in around 92, 93 and was trying to get jobs. And I think after the 30th rejection letter, I moved back home to Chicago and the rest is history. But the reality is that right before that epic recession, the double track, Amtrak's double track system in this area was removed and the rail access was dramatically reduced. And in as much as there are a lot of economic challenges that we can perceive looking at Greater Hartford and Springfield, it's very clear to us that the loss of rail access allowed the larger Northeast corridor to accelerate out of that recession with and without Boston and New York, whereas Greater Hartford and Springfield really followed a fundamentally slower and different track. And I think the thing we would stress here is that gap in performance is widening, not narrowing. And we looked at several ways of sort of qualifying that gap, but for us, it represents a minimum of about 130,000 jobs that Greater Hartford and Springfield did not see since the 1990s. And again, from an economic standpoint, we could argue that number actually is larger than 130,000 based on different ways of looking at historic data and how you look at employment. But structurally, there's a job gap, there's a difference in performance, and it drives home a core notion of our argument about how we start to bridge that gap and allow Greater Hartford and Springfield to better participate in an otherwise robust Northeast corridor economic perspective. So as we go to the next slide, the fundamental thing about Metro Hartford and Springfield compared to Northeast corridor is that there's a fundamental set of economic differences which have taken 30 years to evolve to this point. I think none of us will be surprised about strength in aerospace and insurance carriers, but just looking at those in relation to the strengths across the broader Northeast corridor, you perceive these significant differences. Now, obviously, the biggest gaps in terms of professional services really start to resonate. As we go to the next slide, I think, the next and probably the most important thing is these jobs in professional services become important because they're a segment of jobs that are much more likely to rely on transit, whether that be bus, local rail, or commuter rail than other industries in general. So as you see the transit ridership shares for Greater Hartford Springfield versus US average versus Northeast corridor, again, vast differences in transit use. And our general view, again, having talked to Al, having talked to different people, is that there's a connection here. Our inability to connect into the Northeast corridor has slowed our ability to absorb jobs of these nature over the past 30 years. And as a result, we're talking about effectively a jobs gap in this area, but effectively missing out on jobs. So as we go to the next slide, I think the other piece of this that we had to be sensitive to is putting it in context with COVID. And I think, the one thing we've latched onto about trends pre-COVID is that there's a fundamental difference about places like, New York City and Boston, because we have tremendously robust transit infrastructure. And what we see pre-COVID is that these cities with more diverse transit systems were able to reduce the rate at which people were motivated to work from home. So again, if I'm in, say, a Dallas or a Houston, I don't really have robust transit, and as a result, I'm driving. And if that commute starts to get beyond 45 minutes, I'm going to try and work from home more often. So I think pre-COVID, we're looking at a the importance of this regional transit infrastructure as an important economic development amenity, and having it gives people a lot more options to get around than they would in, say, an LA, a Houston, or a Miami. So that to us is important in terms of looking at, again, what happens post-COVID. We do expect work from home will be here for a while, but it gets us this perspective about just profound differences in terms of these legacy cities with impressive transit versus those that, you know, never grew up with it. So as we go to the next slide, I think it really boils down to four notions for us. You know, we talk about a distinct and consequential region, again, a top 40 metro. So that's saying something, but specific job loss and job weakness, fundamentally missing transit, which we think in our view connects to a challenge of jobs not created. And we think these two really tie into two broader concerns, which we're particularly concerned about in terms of the recovery. One is we think there's a clear housing gap, so an inability for the region to deliver new housing stock. And I think housing is fundamentally connected to economic development. If we don't have the housing stock, it's harder to compete for new residents. But I think perhaps most important is that the study is really shedding some light on some glaring equity concerns. When you look at Hartford and Springfield in relation to other places along the Northeast corridor, which have a history of similar equity challenges, there are some glaring differences. We think fundamentally from an equity standpoint, the lack of regional rail really prevents people from accessing an otherwise robust regional jobs market. We think this is probably one of the areas where, further study is warranted because it's, from our perspective, in the very apparent additional gap that we're talking about today. So on the next slide, again, part of this is all about the value of the proposed transit improvements that would essentially come up with a 21st century version of the inland route. So it's the completion of the Hartford Line, which had just gotten going pre-COVID, but also a broader set of improvements to better connect Hartford to Springfield to Worcester into Boston. And again, as we appreciate, the distance as the crow flies between the two routes is essentially the same, roughly 150 miles. So from that perspective, it's a very compelling idea to understand how we could use this capacity to better improve access in the region. So the next slide starts to lay out what we think are the set of construction costs for all of these rail improvements. These are estimated in current dollars today, so no inflation. And again, I think part of the challenge of being an AECOM employee is that you get used to big construction projects. So from our perspective, the notion of $6 billion to $9 billion in transit improvement costs over the next 20 years, again, conservative and aggressive notions of those costs, it strikes people as a lot of money. And I think, the reality with rail infrastructure is that it's part of a bigger conversation about, if we were to look at Mass Pike today, probably not as many people using it as pre-COVID, but we have no illusions about the return to traffic congestion into Boston, and rail becomes a viable alternative. So thinking about these investments in that perspective is also important. So as we go to the next slide, part of this study was really about understanding the value of the TOD opportunity. And really part of the goal here was to get at the capacity for new development around each of the existing and proposed station areas. So this includes places like Palmer, as well as, fundamentally more urban locations like Worcester, Springfield, and New Haven, trying to get at this capacity for new development. So let's go to the next slide. We came up with an approach to estimate the amount of commercial square footage, the number of potential housing units and jobs that could potentially fit within a mile of these stations. And obviously we didn't want to do this as a 100% count. That would be difficult, but we wanted to leverage, many of these cities have already done TOD plans where they've identified sites. Dan Hodge in his prior research had done a lot of work to focus on Worcester, Springfield. So there's a lot of good information to get at, the capacity of development within a mile of each of these station areas. And we ultimately came up with, opportunity for roughly 19 million square feet of commercial space, of 42,000 housing units, and another 32,000 jobs. The goal here ultimately was to come up with this framework. Again, we think housing is a key gap for the region in terms of being able to provide not only, fundamentally to provide reasonably priced housing for people at different price points, but also allowing them to better access regional job opportunities. So as we go to the next slide, trying to come up with a framework that really focuses on a jobs gap was critical to us. we wanted to start with this core notion that there is a statistical relationship between employment and professional services and reliance on commuter rail ridership. And statistically, we did identify that positive correlation, which for us is fundamentally important to this effort. We also wanted to understand the connections between the size of the market and the concentration of professional services jobs. And again, for Metro Hartford-Springfield, already a consequential region, that simple notion of the share of jobs in professional services today versus our benchmarks became another way of looking at a more aggressive approach for what the size of this one job gap could be. And again, going through this process, we came to a notion of roughly 20 to 40,000 jobs across the region, which are not there today, which we are connecting to the provision of new rail infrastructure over the next 30 years. And to be clear, we're not saying these jobs show up all at once. Obviously, it's going to take time to make these rail improvements. So we came up with an approach to incrementally add jobs over the next 30 years to come up with a perspective as to what that upside could look like. As we go to the next slide, the framework here is pretty simple. We're correlating the direct costs of new rail improvements, so 6.4 to 9.4 billion over 10 years in current dollars, in context with the specific job benefits of 20 to 40,000 jobs over 30 years. So we're talking about cumulative benefit to the region. Talking about construction of TOD real estate, so new construction of residential and commercial development. And then we're talking about a specific set of fiscal benefits, income taxes, property taxes attributable to the combined region. We've also estimated indirect benefits associated with these things. What we have not done, for example, is we have not shown the indirect and induced benefits of the construction costs of transit. So we have left that out of this equation. We have also left out the equity piece. We believe it is a fundamentally additionally important piece in that, we do believe that there is a wage benefit in terms of getting existing residents to have access to better quality jobs. And so that's another piece of upside that we freely acknowledge that's part of this conversation. As we go to the next slide, to me, this conversation of economic benefits related to new jobs really boils down to a simple notion. If I'm a city manager of a small town and I can get one new household to move to my community, that new household is worth a significant amount of money over the next 20 to 30 years. And in our case, we're talking about 20 to 40,000 new jobs over the next 30 years. Again, new wages, 20 to 40 billion, new GDP, 35 to 70 billion. Construction related to TOD, again, roughly 11 billion to 13 billion in construction investment over the next 30 years. Associated fiscal impacts, property taxes, income taxes. These are based on weighted averages across the two states, in between 3 and 5 billion in taxes alone. And then obviously getting to our total benefits over 30 years from a GDP standpoint, 46 to 84 billion. I think the thing to me that's important is that when we think about Hartford and Springfield with, in excess of 650,000 jobs and over 1.6 million residents, the notion of 20 to 40,000 new jobs is actually not that many. In practical terms, it means the share of professional services jobs in the region grows from about 25% to about 28 to 31%. So these are not, in the greater scheme of things, major changes. And as we go to the next slide, again, the set of indirect benefits, I think the important of these, the benefit of these indirect benefits is they speak to the broader ripple effect of this spending. We would say, from a methodological standpoint, that there are a set of upsides that respond to equity that are buried in here, but I think we would do a better job in the future of breaking them out explicitly as a set of direct benefits. But again, additional GDP over 30 years between 15 and 20 billion. So again, a project that from our perspective stands on its own on a direct benefit standpoint. I think the indirect and induced only help frame the conversation as well. Next slide. I think that's it. With that, questions, comments? Seriously, no pressure.
Yeah, this is Scott Shanley from Manchester. I don't know who the chair of the meet is the chair here.
Him.
I just,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thank you. I just wanted to be recognized by the chair. I think this is really a fascinating study. I know it's been an initiative of CROG's even before the Springfield New Haven line was operating, to find a way to link. And I think the timing on this, and I think a lot of that's thanks to Lyle's persistence, the timing on this is really good. Should we see a stimulus bill? And I just want to say I appreciate the work and I appreciate the vision. And I think this work with the appropriate stimulus funding could probably be done in a quicker time period than this projects, than 30 years. But having said that, I think it's very important, and just want to thank everybody for the work. And I regret to drop off for another meeting, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comments. I am scanning. We've got quite a few participants, so I'm scanning to see if we've got hands raised or even someone who looks like they want to talk. Just on the cusp of it, right? I am not seeing others, which must mean that the presentation answered every single question everybody had, which is great news. So if I missed you, speak up now or forever lose your opportunity.
Hi, this is Matt Hart, West Hartford, Connecticut.
Sure.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for the good presentation. I enjoyed the one at the recent CROG meeting as well. Could you elaborate a little bit further on the benefits to two sectors, one higher ed, and then secondly, manufacturing?
So the analysis focused very narrowly on a set of professional services industries. We would argue that particularly post-COVID with, the notion of advanced manufacturing unfolding as we speak, I think there are to the extent that the region sees growth in this set of professional services and information type jobs, there's a clear parallel, which we would argue is captured in the indirect and induced benefits of particularly the jobs in information and tech, really aligning with regional strength in advanced manufacturing. I keep hearing about notions of digital twins and digital plants, but I think the reality with advanced manufacturing is that it's fundamentally happening in digital framework. So I would say that the ability to position for and compete for those professional services jobs allows the region to actually sustain some strength in advanced manufacturing. And I think, with respect to higher ed, I think Al and Stephen have talked at length about the region's profound strength in higher ed as a driver of innovation. And I think for us, the transit piece really just serves to better connect that and integrate it and really expand on that leverage, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
This is Chris Kervick, Windsor Locks. The question is, how will this information be communicated or rolled out? And what can we as municipal leaders do to assist in that process?
Absolutely. So one of the first items is there will be a press conference at 2:00 this afternoon. It's a joint conference with Congressman Neal and Congressman Larson at 2:00 here in Springfield in front of Union Station. And so that's the first step in rolling this piece out. My understanding is that after our briefing today, we'll be sharing not only the slides, but we also have the report, and we can share that with you as well. I want to make sure that I open this up to Lyle, if you had some ideas around this as well.
Sure. Thank you very much, First Selectman. So today is the beginning. Aside from a reporter that jumped the gun on the embargoed document. So we'll have this event, the rollout at 2:00, and we have gotten this to a lot of opinion leaders. We also, Pioneer Valley and us, have a federal lobbyist who will be helping in the Washington side, and then we'll be reaching out to our delegation here. We've reached out to the governor's office, to the Connecticut Department of Transportation on this so far, and all federal congressional delegation. So we have more work to do. And again, I think part of this is sort of the kickoff, Chris, that we would start on, but we're by no means done. As Scott Shanley said before he left, I think the timing is pretty good. So we have some work to do, but we have a number of ways to proceed from here. And I don't know if you had any more specific questions. We certainly look forward to your help on this going forward.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Just a plug for the Springfield folks. The Union Station in Springfield is absolutely beautiful. So if you don't see it in the press conference, hop on the Hartford Line and check it out. They did a great job.
Thank you. Right, I'm scanning to see if I see others who wish to speak. Not seeing any at this point in time. So obviously we have committed to sending you not only the stack on this, but also the report itself. We're looking forward to a very successful press conference today, and hopefully you'll see coverage tomorrow in various newspapers around this. I want to stop and see if Lyle or Stephen have some parting remarks they'd like to make.
I guess just one point, if I'm getting through here, I think it's important to reiterate that Hartford-Springfield is the 40th big metro in the United States. And we need to keep reinforcing that, because some people say, well, you know, town X with 6,000 people needs to get on a rail line. Well, you know, this is a 1.6 million person, 40th largest metro in the country. We really need to get access to Boston and enhanced access to New York City. And give or take, we're 100 miles from both. And that geographic position is an amazing opportunity we can take. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is the status quo is not acceptable. We have been drifting down with a minus 130,000 job opportunities lost. And so if we don't do something, the trajectory is not pretty, bluntly. Connecticut gained 0.9% in population in 10 years, which is basically rounding error. So the point about this is a huge opportunity, I think, that we could all take. And again, it's a bi-state effort. We both need to be in it. Connecticut has work to do to get from Hartford to Springfield in terms of double tracking, stations, and electrification. And Massachusetts has work to do, Springfield to Worcester. So I'm saying this is a huge opportunity, and I guess that's the point that we can make as we roll this out. The status quo is not pretty, but there's a huge opportunity in front of us that I think should be available.
Lyle, I think those are absolutely wonderful points. And one of the other pieces I think a lot about on this too is, you know, this reconstruction of the inland route with, you know, climate change progressing as quickly as it is. We are going to need another option to go from Boston to New York down to DC. And this is the right choice. We think this is the right choice around this. And there's, again, so many economic benefits to it that we think that's a really important point as well.
Yep. And again, just one last point. Matt Hart brought it up. This is a relatively narrowly constrained measurement of benefits. Would this help us recruit more people to higher ed? Yep. Could this help us recruit more manufacturers on the 91 corridor? Yep. So there's a whole series of other potential things once you have this kind of a piece of infrastructure in place. So this is the opportunity. I think, as Chris said, this is a fairly conservative analysis of benefits. This is not, you know, dredging up every potential benefit at all. There's a lot more potential benefits that we can use for economic development going forward. So that's another piece of this, which is, this is the floor. We can do a lot better. And I think that is something to keep in mind as well.
I think one of the pieces I took away when I first read the report was, even at the most conservative, the most expensive possible project cost here in the report, that the return on that infrastructure investment is almost 10 to 1. You know, in economic benefits for our communities. And, you know, when we think about that, and we think about that over a period of 10 to 20 years, I just think that is so huge. And Lyle, you're right. The future's not pretty if we don't do something. And so I think that one's really key. I want to make sure to capture Dan in the comments mentioned that there's also a significant benefit of connecting Worcester, which is the second biggest city in New England, to Connecticut and New York by rail. I'm sure we all agree that that's absolutely true on that as well. Thank you for that comment, Dan. I'm going to see if we've got any others down here. Okay. And Steve, I know you had a couple things that you'd like to share.
Well, I just want to again say that we are really excited to be part of this process and to have made a contribution, which we hope we can continue to go forward and dig a little deeper, particularly in the equity issue, and finding ways to really capture things we can do in the process to improve that. I think this is the first time I've seen, I've kind of grown up here, and this is the region I've been involved in, although I've been many other places in the country. This is the first time I think we're as close to getting this opportunity moving as I've ever seen. So I think it's exciting from that standpoint too. That's
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for your hard work. Your entire team on this report is an incredibly impressive report. Very, very good quality. So I would like to say everybody, of course, is welcome to join us at the press conference at 2 o'clock. I know folks are busy, but please know that there's definitely room for you on the steps of Union Station to come and say hello. Hopefully you will be seeing coverage on this tomorrow, and we will be reaching out to you again to, look for your support and assistance regarding how we get this information out and how we continue to move forward on this. But for now, we want to say thank you for taking the time today for the presentation. It was really good. Thank you, Chris Brewer. You did a wonderful job explaining all of those things. And we want to say thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.